You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Diana Gabaldon. Be sure to go over to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. There's handy links in the sidebar where you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app, on your phone, on your computer, wherever you do it. You can find links there. You also find us on YouTube. There's a link in the sidebar as well. I'd like to thank some sponsors who faithfully support the show and allow us to do what we do. George Kramer and his new book, Blind to Blood. Ben Bergstall had a unique job. He was a tissue procurement specialist. When someone died, he would surgically remove people's body parts for donation. He really enjoyed doing it. So much so, when an anonymous email asked him to consider recovering people's body parts on the side, he was more than happy to oblige. The trouble was Ben sought out live people to fulfill his clandestine clients' needs. Read all about Ben's exploits in this riveting book that delves into tissue procurement, Blind to Blood by George Kramer. Pick up your copy today on Amazon and find out why people are saying this is an intense page-turner, that they are also fascinated by digging into the mind of Ben and finding out how he works. If you would like to see a look into the darker side of humanity, pick up Blind to Blood, the riveting new page-turner by George Kramer. Also, I'd like to thank Richard Thomas for sponsoring the show. Richard has an online fiction writers course, the University of Richard. And there's a link in the show notes. There's a banner there where you can click on and you can see the course guide. Lots and lots of classes coming up. He can help teach you to be the best writer you can be. There's classes coming up for the 2018 and 2019 season, like short story mechanics, writing flash fiction, contemporary dark fiction, advanced creative writing workshops, how to write a novel in a year, lots and lots of stuff from a very prolific and excellent writer, Richard Thomas, teaching you how to be the best writer you can be. It's the University of Richard. There's a link in the show notes. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from our good friend Richard Gleaves. I'm very excited this week to have Diana Gabaldon on the show with me. Diana is the author of the Outlander series, and Outlander has been is now, excuse me, I had a frog in my throat, is now a very successful television series. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Hank. Nice of you to invite me.
Well, thank you. I begin each show with a variation of the same question, and that question is, how did you first know that you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, I've known that since I was about 8 years old. That was the age at which I realized that actually people wrote books. They didn't just appear on the library shelves, like toilet paper in the grocery store. They were actually produced by someone. I said, well, that's what I want to do. And, everybody comes to it in their own way. Some people it's early, some people late. But most people who are kind of born with it, you might say, they usually wake up to it around 7 or 8, I think. But nobody, of course, knows what to do next because there aren't any roadmaps for being a writer. Everybody figures it out in their own way, in their own time. And I came from a very conservative family background. My father would say to me, well, you're such a poor judge of character, you're bound to marry some bum, he'd say. So get a good education so you could support your children. So with this going on at home, I thought, well, perhaps I wouldn't announce, so I wanted to write novels for a living, because I, even at that tender age, realized that this was kind of financially iffy. And so I went into science. I liked science. I was good at it. Actually, I have multiple degrees in science, including a Ph.D. in quantitative behavioral ecology. And I worked as a scientist for quite a long time. I was a research professor at Arizona State University, but I still wanted to write books. And when I turned 35, I said to myself, well, Mozart was dead at 36. Maybe they're going to move on here, just in case. And so I said, okay, on the next birthday, I'm going to start writing a book just to learn how. So that's how.
Now, you became a scientist and a Ph.D. Was there any conflict to you in this very artful endeavor of wanting to be a storyteller, of wanting to be a writer, as opposed to this very analytical side with with becoming a scientist? Did those two things clash in you at all?
No, not at all. I often get that question because people assume that being a scientist is this very cold, clinical, linear, tidy thing. And, writing novels is this very colorful, fuzzy, touchy-feely, warm kind of thing. And that's not the case at all in either direction. Analysis and structure are just as important to any form of art as they are to science. And intuition and imagination are as important to science as they are to art. In fact, science and art are exactly the same thing, or at least they rest on the same thing, which is the ability to discern patterns and to pull patterns out of chaos.
I love that answer. I'm friends with a couple of other scientists who are also fiction writers, and I've noticed those same kinds of things, that good scientists tend to be good storytellers, but I've never heard it explained quite like that. I love that analogy. But also, after doing about 80 of these interviews that I've done, the resounding majority of people say, well, I've just always been a writer. It's or something I discovered very early on.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why that is, and why some of us seem to be more inclined toward that and some not?
No, I'm not sure that there is any, discernible objective evidence for why people enter one career or another, or rather that they're drawn to one career or another. There are usually practical, logistical reasons why they enter one or another. That doesn't always have to do with their personal predilections. But, I was born a storyteller myself. I just always had it, and therefore, that was no question in my mind. In fact, once I realized that people wrote books, that was obviously what I was meant to do. But not everybody's like that, and I talk to a lot of people about their desires and their aspirations, and many people actually aren't born with a overriding desire to be a specific thing or to achieve a specific thing. Sometimes they have rather vague notions in one way or another. Sometimes they're not drawn to anything in particular, or are drawn to a lot of things at once, which gives them a certain amount of trouble in choosing direction in their life. But it's certainly as common as it is to be born with a strong urge toward one thing or another.
Coming to the realization that people actually write books as opposed to them just appearing out of the ether, I think is something that some adults still don't grasp.
True.
That
right, true.
Yeah, that this is actually work, and it requires someone to put in a lot of dedication and really to commit your life to it if it's something that you're really serious about. And that's a very profound thing to come to at 8 years old.
Oh, I suppose so. But as I say, coming to the realization that I was meant to be a writer didn't mean that I had the slightest idea what that would involve.
Right. So you said you were 35 before you actually tried your hand at it.
Right.
Had you dabbled at all through the years, or was it just something you filed
really
away?
Well, I had taken your usual humanities courses in high school, college, and so forth. So, I'd written short stories and things like that as class assignments. But I had never, worked from my own inspiration, you might say. And I did write comic books for Walt Disney in my late 20s. And my mother taught me to read by reading the Walt Disney comics. I'd been able to read since the age of 3. I can't remember not being able to read, but I never gave up reading Walt Disney comics. And at the age of 27 or so, I was reading one day, and I said, well, this is pretty bad. I bet I could do better myself. And so, in the moment I found the name and address of the editor who handled that particular line. It was Western Publishing at that point who held the license. And I sent him a note, and I said, "Dear sir, I've been reading your comic books for 25 years or so, and they've been getting worse and worse. I said, I don't know that I could do better myself, but I'd like to try." And luckily I had hit Del Connell, a gentleman with a profound sense of humor, who wrote back and said, "Okay, try." And he also sent me a quick template so that I could see the format in which to submit a script. So I wrote him one. He didn't buy it, but he did something much more valuable. He told me what was wrong with it. He did buy my second story, and I continued to write for Del for another 18 months or so, at the end of which the powers that be at Disney said, "We've got 40 years of Carl Barks scripts in the files. Why are we buying new ones? Let's just reprint the old ones." So they stopped buying new scripts. At that point, Del sent me over to a colleague of his, Tom Goldberg, on the Disney lot, who was running the foreign comics program, and these were very similar stories. It was just that you couldn't do things with an American theme like baseball or ghosts. But other than that, it was the same characters and the same story forms. So I worked for Tom for another couple of years until we ran into the same situation there. They suspended the purchase of new scripts because they said, "We've already got plenty, why do this?" So that was the end of my comic book writing career, but it kind of stood me in good stead, and I was later able to write a graphic novel as part of the Outlander series.
That's amazing. So when you wind up writing comics for Disney just on a lark.
Yeah.
So were you completely bitten by the bug at that point?
Well, writing fiction, you might say.
You're right. Yeah.
Well, I had always told stories, either to myself or with my younger sister. She has the same facility, and we would stay up late at night, telling stories back and forth, these long, involved, collaborative sorts of things. So, I had always had stories. I just didn't have any idea how you would turn something like that into a novel.
Wow. So you turn 35 and you say, okay, if I'm ever going to write a novel, I'd better get cracking at it.
Yeah.
Was that first thing that you attempted? Did that become Outlander?
Yes, that's right.
Wow. That's quite an accomplishment for your first novel to be such a breakout success that Outlander is. Where did the idea for the story come from? It's a very odd idea, where did that come from? What's the kernel of that?
Well, it was a sort of pragmatism. I said, okay, obviously the only way to learn to write a novel is to actually write a novel. Because up to this point, I had written a lot of things, mostly academic, or non-fictional. But I was a university professor, and I also worked as a freelance for the computer press. So, I wrote software reviews and technical articles and tutorials and documentation and grant proposals. I taught international seminars on scientific computation. So, I wrote textbooks and teaching materials. I wrote popular science articles and, scholarly journal articles, all this kind of stuff, including comic books. And no one had ever really told me how to do that, other than Del sending me a format for how to submit a script. I had just looked at an example of whatever I was going to write, whether a software review for InfoWorld or a grant proposal for the NSF. And then I wrote one, and I said, it didn't look quite right. I poked it till it did. I said, well, okay, you've been reading novels for 30-odd years. Surely if you write one, you will recognize it. I said, okay, I write a novel. That's the only way to learn how to do something like this. And what I wanted to know was, what is it? This is a big thing to write a novel. It's, much larger than the average sort of thing that you do even for a textbook. And I needed to know what does it take in terms of, mental commitment and daily discipline, organization, research, etc. All of the mental things that go into writing a novel. And that's what I wanted to find out. So I said, okay, obviously I need to write a novel. So what's the easiest kind of book to practice with? I'm not going to show it to anyone. I'm going to tell anyone what I'm doing. So it really doesn't matter. And I thought about that for a bit. I said, well, for me, probably historical fiction would be the easiest thing to practice with, because I was a research professor. I knew my way around the library. Said it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record, which actually works pretty well.
Yes,
so
it
I
does.
said, all right, I said, okay, historical fiction, where shall I set this? Because I've got no background in history, just the 6 hours of Western civilization they make you take as an undergrad. So, I'd have to look at everything anyway. It didn't really matter. So I said, okay, where shall I set this? So I was casting around looking for a good time and place, Venice, 15th century, American Civil War, and I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. This was one of the, I don't know how familiar you are with Doctor Who, but it was one of the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton's episodes. And in this, the premise of the Doctor Who show, for those of your listeners who don't know it, is that the Doctor is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey who travels through space and time, having adventures in his TARDIS. And along the way, he picks up companions from different periods of Earth's history. And in this particular show, the Doctor had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745. And this was a young man, 18, 19, who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's kind of fetchy. Anyway, I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. And I said to myself, well, it doesn't really matter where you set this book. The important thing is pick a point and get started. I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters. Nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt, which is, of course, a very powerful and compelling image. So that's where I began. Well, I also went immediately to the library and began doing research, looked up Scotland, 18th century Highlands, and came up with 38 references, went and looked, and there were 400 books on Scotland, costume, geography, language. So I just took so long, took out anything that looked interesting, and began doing the research along with the writing. Well, the only thing that I knew for sure about writing novels at this point was that they should have conflict, and that's still the best thing I know about writing novels. Anyway, I was looking for conflict in Scotland in the 18th century, and you don't do that for very long without running smack into Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobite Rebellion of the 45. I said, okay, that looks like lots of conflict, that'll be fine. And so I said, well, now it looks, from my 3 days research, as though this was essentially Scots versus English. Let's see, I think I should maybe have a female character to play off these guys, and we'll have sexual tension. But must have a lot of kilt wearers, of course. And I said, so maybe it would be a good idea if I have a female character, and if I make her English, then we'll have lots of conflict. So about the third day of writing, I introduced this English woman. Had no idea who she was, what she was doing in the story. She got in the plot. But I loosed her into a cottage full of Scots to see what she would do. And she walked in. They're all sitting around the fire muttering to each other. They turned around and stared when she came in. And I was thinking, why? What's going on? Does she look odd? And one of them drew himself up, and he said, my name's Dougal Mackenzie, and who might you be? And without my stopping to think, I just typed, my name's Claire Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you? That's not weird. Don't sound at all like an 18th century person. So I fought with her for several pages, trying to beat her into shape and make her talk like a historical woman. She wasn't having any of this. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. And she also took over and started telling the story herself. I said, well, okay, I'm going to fight with you all the way through this book. I said, no one's ever going to see this. It doesn't matter what bizarre thing I do. Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later. So it's all her fault that there's time travel in these books.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. There are so many things you just said that I want to pick apart. But
Sure.
The first one was that you said that historical fiction would be easy because you knew your way around a library and knew how to research. My mother gave me a very great piece of advice when I was young. She said, you don't have to know everything. You need to know where to find everything.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I think I think a lot of people get it wrong in that they feel like they can't sit down to ever get started because they don't know everything they need to know. But that's absolutely false. You just need to know where to find things. And then when you do find something, know how to use your imagination to turn that camera angle all around that situation and find where your ins and outs are. That's brilliant. The other thing that I really resonated with me as you were talking is that this character just wanted to be who she was, and you had no control over her. That happens so often when you get into a story and the characters just really come to life. Do you ever have a situation where you're writing and the characters don't come to life and you start having to mold them to your will? Is there a big difference for you? When you get to that situation, what do you do? Do you stop writing? Do you do something to kick them back into gear? How does that work for you?
No, if they're not behaving on their own, there's there's something wrong with what I'm doing, I just back out and, come in from a different angle or abandon whatever I was doing completely and start on a different scene. I don't work in a straight line, and I don't work with an outline, so it doesn't actually matter a lot. If a scene is not working, I just check it.
If you don't work with an outline, how difficult is it, especially when you're dealing with historical events and a historical setting? How do you maintain the integrity of the historical part of historical fiction while allowing the story to breathe and take on a life of its own?
I don't actually see any contradiction there. It would probably matter more if I were dealing with what's called historical narrative or something, where I'm actually telling the story of historical events and concentrating on historically known people. Because this is something where, the outline, as it were, exists, the events exist, but that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm telling the story of completely fictional people, and it's just wrapped around historical events in the same way that people's ordinary lives are. Take 9/11, that had a great impact on everyone's life, but it's not as though every single one of us were standing at ground zero. We heard about it, we experienced that at different degrees of distance, and the impact that it had on us was either modulated or increased by our close familiarity. If we knew someone who was in one of those buildings, of course, we experienced, deep pangs of personal anguish and so forth. Whereas if we did not know anyone, it would be, a greater sense of more generalized outrage or terror or whatever. It would have been a big impact regardless, but the specific impact would be regulated by our personal circumstances. And that's what I'm dealing with, is people whose personal circumstances cause them to react or flee or whatever from historical circumstances in which they find themselves. So, it's up to me to choose which particular historical circumstances I want to dwell on or deal with. And those come usually from my familiarity with history, my increasing sense of who these people were, the times in which they live, and sort of the tides of history, you might say. For instance, my first 3 books are set essentially in Scotland, and then the next are in the New World, in the American colonies. And for a while there, people kept saying, "Oh, why did you leave Scotland? I like Scotland. I want to see more men in kilts. Why did you go to America? I'm not that interested in America." And I said, well, if you were paying any attention in the second book, you will have noticed the culmination of the rebellion of the 45 was, the crushing of the Highland culture. That I meant it. After the 1745, there was no Highland culture. You did not have men in kilts running around. You did not have Gaelic being spoken and so forth. And I said, this stopped, this is what happened. And I said, so what happened to the people who were there? Well, their lives were thrown into chaos, which we see in the third book, and then a great many of them emigrated or were transported against their will to the American colonies. But either way, that's where they went, and that's where the tide of history took the Highland culture, or its remnants, which are actually flourishing very remarkably today. But that's why, is because they left, and that's where they went, so I went with them.
And if you're going to be true to the characters, then you need to be true to their and follow them through all of their evolution and their growth, wherever that may take you.
Yeah. Yeah, these people as you live with them and work with them and so forth. And while they can certainly do surprising things, these are not things that are antithetical to their characters. I will occasionally get letters from someone saying, "Oh, you betrayed this character, you ruined this character because she did this particular thing that I don't agree with at all." Don't agree with it does not mean that that's not part of this person's character. It just means you don't agree with them.
It's so funny the way people get wrapped up in a fictional character and take ownership. These people not only become part of our lives as the writer, but these things just really take root in readers' lives. And to me, that's one of the most fascinating things ever. I love to get a letter from someone and they say that, and maybe I'll have just something that I take as a throwaway line or something that is just incidental, that is the thing that resonates with people. It blows my mind. It really does.
Yeah, that's quite true. But everybody who reads the book brings their own perspective, their own education, their own background, their own expectations and their own prejudices to the reading experience. So, no two people read the same book, even though it may be the same words.
How long did it take you to finish that first book?
18 months.
Okay. And did you...
I had 2 full-time jobs and 3 children under the age of 6 while I was writing that book. So I have no patience with people telling me, I don't have time to write a book.
Oh yeah.
Write a book, you'll find time.
You absolutely will. Did you tell anyone that you were writing this book?
No, I did not. For one thing, I thought my husband would probably try to stop me if I told him about it. Not out of any objection to my writing a book, but out of fear that I would drop dead. He would have said, wait until my business is doing better. He'd started his own business, which, actually got going quite well. But at that time, I was our sole support. And he would have said, wait till the business is doing better and you can quit one of your jobs, or, wait till the kids are in school, which would make perfect sense. But I knew that if I didn't start writing right then, I might never do it. And so I just didn't tell anyone. The other thing was that I didn't want anyone giving me advice. I wanted to figure things out on my own. Because I was old enough and had done enough writing to realize that how one writes is a deeply individual thing. And I had had any number of people through school and high school and so forth telling me, you must have a topic sentence, you must have a topic paragraph, you must organize things, you must have a bulleted, outline and so forth. And I knew from the age of 10 that this was nonsense. I never did that. So I didn't want anyone telling me, how I should write a novel either. I knew it was going to be, my way or nothing. So I was going to have to figure it out on my own. And I didn't want anyone giving me unwanted advice while I was doing that.
At what point in the process did you let the cat out of the bag?
Well, that was kind of an accident. It goes back to my being an expert in scientific computation, which was kind of an academic accident. But I was, and that's what allowed me to write for the computer press. Anyway, one day Byte magazine sent me a new software package to write a review of, and with it, a trial membership to CompuServe. This was 1985. The internet didn't exist yet. But there were these 3 information services, Genie, Delphi, and CompuServe. CompuServe still exists. The other 2 have long since perished, although we exist in a very small capacity. But it had, as the others did, these special interest groups within it. And this particular software vendor had a special interest group that was for the technical support of their new software package. Well, this is just the sexiest idea anybody had ever come up with in terms of technology, is you could have online support, And so they wanted it mentioned in their review. And so the editors at Byte had obligingly sent us along and said, so, sign up, use the trial membership, check it out. So I did. This was back in the days when they charged you $30 an hour to be connected. So I was not passing up on that. And it took me about an hour to learn all I needed to know about their support forum and write the review. But then I had 4 hours of free connect time left. So I said, well, what else is in here? And I began poking around within the CompuServe and came across a group of people called the Literary Forum. Now, these were people who liked books. There were some professional writers, some aspiring writers, some people who didn't write but just liked to talk about books and listen to writers and chat about intellectual things like that. It was pretty much a 24-hour literary cocktail party. And for someone with 2 full-time jobs and 3 small children, it was the ideal social life. So I immediately signed up and got automated software so I wouldn't go broke using it, and started hanging around there. Well, I'd been there for about a year when I made up my mind to write a novel, and I was not going to tell any of those people what I was doing either, because I had seen any number of people come through the forum talking about, I'm going to write this, and I'm going to write that. I have, I'm planning out, my 10-volume series dealing with this. And, plans was all they'd ever have. You could see people saying, oh, I'm almost finished with the research that I've been doing for the last 8 years. And you could sort of see the professional writers, silently rolling their eyes whenever this happened. And so I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write the book, and then I'll see if I want to tell anyone about it. So I was keeping that quiet, too. But I worked late at night, as one does when you have small children and multiple jobs. And I would, break the monotony by logging in the CompuServe every half hour or so, picking up messages, dropping new messages, and so on. And one night I found myself having a desultory argument with a gentleman on the Lit Forum about what it feels like to be pregnant. And he said, oh, I know what that's like. My wife's had 3 children. I laughed and I said, yeah, Buster, I've had 3 children. And he said, well, can you tell me what it's like? I said, I can, yes, but it's sort of complex. I don't know that I could put it all in a 30-line message slot, which is all we had then. I said, but I have this little piece that I wrote a few months ago in which a young woman tells her brother in some detail what it's like to be pregnant. You know, he's young and curious. And so she's telling him. And I said, I'll put it in the library here and you can read it. So I did. And everyone who had been following the argument and read this piece and they all came back and said, well, this is great. What is it? I said, I don't know. And they said, where's the beginning? And I said, well, I haven't read that yet. And they said, we'll put up some more of it. It's fascinating. So, as I said, I don't write in a straight line, so I don't have contiguous chunks for quite a while. I just have disconnected scenes. But, you know, with this sort of encouragement going on, I mean, it's like heroin. The first time somebody says they like what you write, you want to get the more. And so, maybe reverse heroin. But anyway, I would put up a scene for them whenever I had one that looked as though it didn't take a lot of explanation. So, you know, every 2 or 3 months, I'd put up a 5 or 10 page scene. And people got more and more interested, and they would say, oh, Diana has a new chunk, have you read it? And they'd all go read it, and they'd come talk to me and ask me questions, and you know, I'd tell them whatever I thought I knew at that point, and, you know, it was a lot of fun. But anyway, people began saying, well, this is great, you should try and publish it. And I said, I don't even know what kind of book it is at this point, you know, because it didn't matter. So I just used any literary device or element that struck my fancy. Consequently, I've never been able to describe those books to anyone because they don't have a genre. I mean, they don't. And
or they have all the genres.
They have all of them, yes, but it's not much help in marketing. So anyway, I said, well, you know, I don't know about this book. I'm writing it for practice, but, you know, eventually I'm going to write a book I'd like to publish. So, you know, what should I do? And by this time I knew a number of the published writers quite well. They were very kind about sharing their information with me. And every single one of them said, get a literary agent. They said an agent can do 2 things for you. He or she can get your manuscript read much more quickly than if you're just sending it into a slush pile. And if someone is interested in it, then the agent can negotiate a much better contract for you than you could ever do by yourself. And I said, well, this makes sense. You know, how would I find an agent? And they gave me various bits of advice, one of which was talk to other people who have agents. And I said, well, what were the jobs and the children and so forth? That makes the most sense to me, so I'll do that. So just whenever I was talking to someone online who I knew was a professional writer, I would say, well, would you mind telling me a little bit about your agent? You know, do you have the same agent that you started with? If not, why not? How did you find this person? You know, how does the business side of things work? Do they tell you when you get rejected? You know, do you get the money and pay them? Do they get the money and pay you, et cetera, et cetera? And as I said, they were very, very kind about sharing their information. Well, gradually I began to kind of zero in on this one gentleman named Perry Knowlton, who represented a couple of the writers there that I respected a lot. And everyone whom he did represent just thought he walked on water. He was obviously a very eminent, well-known, respected agent. And I learned from their descriptions that he wasn't afraid of very long books or of unorthodox books, both of which it had struck me I had. So I thought, you know, he might be worth a try. But he didn't take unsolicited queries, so I didn't know how to get at him. And I thought, well, you're not finished writing the book either. You know, just go on asking questions. So I did. And one day I was talking to a friend named John Stiff, who writes science fiction mysteries. And I said, well, I'm asking everyone about agents. John, do you have one? And he said, well, yes. He said, by coincidence, it's the same as so-and-so's. His name is Perry Knowlton. He said, I know you're almost ready to look for an agent yourself. Would you like me to recommend you to Perry? I said, well, yes, John, that would be really nice of you. And I was afraid that John would be run over by a bus or leave some served before I finished writing the book. So I said, yeah. So now Perry, God rest his soul, was a much older gentleman who never touched a computer in his life. This was strictly paper and typewriter from that point on. But John, you know, typed a quick note to Perry saying that I was worth looking at, you know, describing the circumstances in which he knew me. I followed that with my own query, which was fairly short. I said, dear Mr. Knowlton, I've been writing and selling nonfiction by myself for some years now. But now that I'm writing a novel, I understand that I need good literary representation. You've been recommended to me by John and Judy and Carolyn and all these other people whose opinions I respect. I said, I have this very long historical novel. I don't want to waste your time. Would you be willing to read excerpts from it? I didn't tell him I wasn't through writing it. Excerpts were all I had. But he very kindly called me and said, yes, he would be happy to read my excerpts. So I hastily wrote a 26-page single-space synopsis with what I thought I knew about the book at that point and sent it with my file of excerpts. And he took me on the basis of an unfinished first novel, which is, you know, not usual and certainly very lucky. Well, I finished the book 6 months later, and I called Perry ahead of time to tell him it was coming. And I said, I realized as I got toward finishing that there was more to this story, but I thought I should stop while I could still lift it. But, if anyone is interested, you can tell them that I think there's more. So I sent him the book, and he sent it to 5 editors who he thought might like it. And within 4 days, 3 of them had called back with offers to buy. He told all of them that she says there's more, and they said, well, trilogies are very popular. Do you think she could write 3? Being a good agent, he said, I'm sure she could. And so he negotiated amongst them, and emerged 2 weeks later with a 3-book contract, and bang, I was a novelist.
I want to take a pause from the show for just a moment to tell you about a sponsor. As a writer, your editor is often the first and last eyes on your work. The best editors are trusted collaborators, bringing your story to life in a way you didn't know was possible. Marlowe Moss will take your writing to a new level and your career to new heights, ensuring that readers not only buy your book, but also love reading it too. One top editor calls Marlowe Moss a talented author in his own right and as skilled an editor as I've seen. I use his skills myself. One of his authors says, I had no idea my writing could be this good. Tension, POV, or timeline issues, plot and pacing, Marlowe does it all, and for the price of a copy edit. Your hard work deserves a better editor, and Marlowe Moss is the editing partner you've been looking for at a price you can afford. Offering developmental and copy editing as well as beta and proofreaders, visit marlowemoss.net for more information and a free sample edit. That's MarloweMoss.net. And let me tell you, I have used Marlowe Moss. He has edited a story for me, and the comments that I got back were eye-opening. As a writer and as someone who spends time with words as much as I do, you tend to gloss over things. You just completely lose them because you're so involved in creating. And you need to step away and let someone else put their eyes on it and help you see the things that you can't see for yourself. Marlowe Moss is amazing. MarloweMoss.net.
Wow. So, what was the initial reaction to that book when you got it finished and you put it out? It's like you said that it's very hard to pin down to genre. How was it initially received, and how long did it take to really gather an audience?
Well, as my first editor said, these have to be word-of-mouth books because they're too weird to describe to anyone, which is true. That worked out. But it would depend. When I was first signing books, at malls and things, people would come by, pick up the book, and say, "Oh, is this the novel?" And I would say yes. And they'd say, "Is that like fiction?" I'd say yes. And then they would say, "Well, what's it about?" Well, let's say there is no good answer to that, other than starting to tell them the story, which you can only do if you have time, and they're very patient. But anyway, I started replying on the basis of age and gender. If it was a young woman, I'd say, historical romance, men in kilts, If it was a young man, I'd say, it's fantasy, time travel, swords, things like that. If it was a slightly older lady, I'd say it's historical fiction. If you like Shogun, you'll love this. And if it was an older gentleman, I'd say, it's military history. And anybody who looked like a complete nerd, I'd say, well, it's science fiction. I've been asked to write up the Gabaldon theory of time travel for the Journal of Transfigural Mathematics in Berlin. It's actually true. But anyway, this worked fine. People bought the book. They're all happy with it. But after a while, I started getting crowds with more of a variety of ages and genders. And so that didn't work any longer. And so what I took to doing then was I'd say, well, I tell you what, pick it up, open it anywhere, and read 3 pages. If you can put it down again, I'll pay you $1. So I've never lost any money on that bet, but I've sold a lot of books. Essentially, if I can get someone to read it, they're mostly booked. But getting someone to read it, this is the rub. Because if you say, oh, it's a romance novel, then, half the population sort of turns up their noses, but I don't read that kind of book. And if you say, oh, it's time travel, another half, so I don't read that kind of book. And the thing is that it's neither of those kinds of books. It's something completely different, which, most people do, in fact, find something to like in it. There's usually something that everybody would like to read in a book like that. But, it's basically a good story with very strong, engaging characters. And it's, as Ron B. Moore said, he said, when I read it, I was thinking, I've never read this story before. Most stories have like a recognizable form. I've never seen a story that looks like this before. And that's what it is. It's unique.
Well, it's very odd in that, not the book, or the books, but the way that, well, in a good way though, in a good way. But it's odd the way that we treat genre. No one wants to be thought of, as their own personal person, as a one-dimensional person. We all like to think that we are many shades of gray, and that we have lots of engaging qualities about us that make us, unique individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at our literature or our entertainment, well, I only like science fiction, or I only like time travel, and I think that's very short-sighted. Because
I think so
too. Because real life is not like that.
Exactly.
But I was very intrigued when I picked up the first book, and you've got these very engaging characters, and very quickly you're hit in the face with time travel, and with sort of this sort of esoteric kind of oddness that's going on, plus this this historical setting and this very real tension. And it didn't take me 3 pages to get hooked. I was hooked on one. But
I'm very obliged to hear that.
Yeah. So I won't get you won't get the dollar from me. So when did you begin to follow up with a second book?
Well, I had a 3-book contract, so pretty much immediately.
So I guess you eventually had to tell your husband you were writing a book.
Oh, that. Well, yeah, I did tell him that after I after I got a literary agent. Actually, he discovered it by accident. He had, as I say, started his own business and converted our garage for use as his office. Then as his business began to be successful, he moved out, and got regular office premises. But he had left behind a computer in the garage, and I inherited that, so that's where I worked. But he would still use it in the evenings for contracts and things like that. So one night he came in while I was working and said, "Oh, could I borrow the computer for a bit? I need to print out, a contract for so-and-so." And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." Well, he couldn't remember exactly what he called the document, and so he pressed the key that brought up the directory, and so like an old IBM XT. And I call all my work files Jamie, so up came 80 files named Jamie. And he looked at me and said, "Who's Jamie?" I said, "It's this book I'm writing, all right." Well, you could tell from my tone of voice that I was not to be trifled with. But certainly, he sort of got into it, and for a while there would stand behind me reading off the screen while I was writing, and what he fondly considers to be a Scottish accent. Anyway, he was on board with that after I told him more or less what it was about, because at that point, it was obvious that I could handle this along with the jobs and the kids, and I was not going to kill myself.
Oh, that's great. You said that you don't write linearly, and that you write scenes out of order until you kind of determine an order. How does that process work for you?
I think in shapes. That's the only way I can describe that. I will what I need to start on any given day is what I call a kernel, a very vivid image, a line of dialogue, anything that I can see or sense concretely. And so I'll write down a line or two describing whatever this is. And then I look at this and I take words out and I put them back and I fiddle with it. Anyway, I write very slowly, backwards and forwards and so forth. And eventually the scene kind of takes place around me, as it were. And it has its own dramatic shape, so I know when it's finished. But I need to try and shut those dogs up. You be quiet. Yeah. They're barking because my husband's in the other half of the yard. They think he's a burglar. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, as I write these things, I will finish a scene. Come on, dogs. Yeah, you can come with me inside. Come on. Come here. And when I finish this scene, then I will, if I know what happens next, of course, I'll write that. But if I don't, then I will start a different scene with a different kernel somewhere else. And as I accumulate these handfuls of little disjunct scenes, they begin to stick together. I'll write something and I'll think, oh, well, this explains that piece that I wrote 4 months ago. And so then I can bring those two together. And seeing this larger piece, I can see what has to happen after that. So then I can write that. And it's sort of like playing Tetris in my head, but very slowly.
Gotcha. Do you have some sort of master document where you list these ideas and these scenes that you see so that you can reference back, or do you keep all of that in your head?
No, I actually do have a document called Master File for each book where I do exactly that. I list the scene with a few keywords, and that way I can find the necessary scenes when I want them.
That's great. So you finished the original trilogy, I assume, and at what point did you say, I think I can do this full time?
Yeah, I did. Excuse me, Matt.
I said, at what point did you realize that you could do this full time, and that this could actually be your career?
Well, actually, not until my agent sold my first book and got me a multi-book contract. And because I had not expected to be able to sell a book immediately. I thought it would take years and years.
Right.
And at that point, no guarantee either to make a living wage. I did know, I'd done research on it, and I knew that the average member of the Writers Guild makes $7,000 a year from writing, which is obviously not enough to support a family. So I was expecting something along those lines. As it was, I got very lucky.
When you finished that original trilogy, how did you decide to continue going? Did you have to kind of go back to the drawing board and come up with new settings and ideas, or at the end of that first trilogy, was there just a natural progression point?
It's just a natural progression, as long as I can still see things happening. I know the story's not done.
And I guess that's one of the benefits of writing 300 years in the past or 250 years in the past, is that you've got there's lots of history to write up too, I guess.
Yes, there is.
So last year, Stars adapted the first book to a television series that came off to critical acclaim and lots of audience appreciation. How was that? How did that process happen? And was it a surprise to you when it started getting some traction?
Well, not a surprise, because I could tell that it was going to be a very good show. But certainly wonder and astonishment and pleasure. Actually, people have been trying ever since I wrote the first book to make a 2-hour movie out of it. And sometimes they tried to make a 4-hour miniseries or something like that. But, prior to Game of Thrones, it just wasn't done. That people made an ongoing television series from a series of books. So, kudos to George for opening things up for the rest of it. But,
right.
that just wasn't an idea that entered anyone's head. And there were no studios that were open to that kind of suggestion. So people kept trying to make a 2-hour movie. And I can tell you, from having witnessed many of these attempts, that it's absolutely impossible to make a 2-hour movie out of that book without ruining it completely. And many talented people tried, but it didn't work. Anyway, we were very careful who we did options with, because there's always a danger that an option will actually succeed, in which case you lose the rights to the material and you'll never get them back again. So we've always been very careful and have only optioned the material 4 times since I wrote it. Well, the last one of these option holders was a guy named Jim Colberg, who also wanted to make a 2-hour movie, and tried. But while he was trying, Ron D. Moore, who I didn't know from a hole in the ground at that point, had finished his Battlestar Galactica and was looking for another project. Well, both his wife and his production partner were, unbeknownst to each other, fans of Outlander. And so one of the ladies, while they were all having dinner together, said, "Oh, well, what about Outlander? It's got all these elements that you enjoy. It's a strange setting, fish out of water kind of thing. It's got this really strong female central character, and a lot of adventure and whatnot." And so I said, "Oh, well, I'll have a look at it." So anyway, he took it home, read it that night, all in one night. And as I say, he said, "I've never read this story before." He said, "But I can see how to make a TV show out of it." So he went looking for the rights holder, which turned out to be Jim. And Jim said, no, I want to make a feature film out of it. And Ron, being a laid-back kind of guy, said, "Okay, I'll check back with you." So, every 6 months or so, he or his partner would check with Jim and say, well, how's that 2 hours working out for you, Jim? And for a while he'd say, oh, well, we're still working on it. And then finally he began to say, well, I think you might be right. It might be a TV show. So at that point, we embarked on 2 years of just absolutely Byzantine contracts. It ended up as a sort of 5-sided agreement between the Sony Corporation, who actually pays for the production of the show, Ron Moore, who had a production contract with them, meaning that they would finance whatever he wanted to do as a pilot project. The Stars Corporation, who is the distributors and marketers for the U.S. license of the show. So they handle what you might call the corporate imagery and so forth, as well as the actual broadcasting of the show. And Jim Kohlberg is the original rights holder, and me, that's the essential holder of the whole series and so forth. So we had this odd 5-sided agreement, which just took pages and pages and pages of Byzantine language. I couldn't possibly tell you what it actually all says, but it did all work out to the point where they were able to go ahead and make the show, and I think they've done a wonderful job with it. Meryl is Ron's partner, her production partner. Meryl and Ron came out to my house before they took it to pitch to Stars, and spent 2 days with me talking over storylines and character and how we both saw all of these things, and we were very much on the same wavelength. So, I trusted them insofar as it's possible to trust anyone in show business.
And television really is the medium for it. Being able to, and like you said, George R.R. Martin really opened the door for that. But being able to give these stories the room and the space that they need to really bring out the nuance and to really start to care about these characters. We really are in a fantastic time where that is available, and kudos to you for holding out and letting the right people do it at the right time. It's an amazing show.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I couldn't be more pleased with how it's worked out. They've done just a wonderful job with it. And, of course, this does wonderful things for the book sales as well.
Oh, I can only imagine. Season 2 begins, I guess, the spring. Is that right?
Yeah, in April, yeah.
April, awesome. And is the TV show following along with the books? Are they?
Yes.
Are the seasons going to be representative of each volume?
Well, yeah, at least until we get up to the 3rd book. I don't know how they will manage with that one, and that it's substantially longer than the first 2. And I don't know whether they will have a longer season to accommodate it, if they will need to, truncate the book and put part of the material in season 4, assuming that we get that far, or what. But as Ron says, I should have such problems.
Absolutely. What about the book series? Is it continuing? Do you see an end in sight for these characters?
Oh, there is an end, yeah, but I'm presently working on the 9th book. There may be a 10th, but I think that's it.
Awesome. What happens at the end of that? Is such a long running series like that? Will it be hard to walk away from those characters?
Well, I don't really have to. I have, of latter years, taken to writing novellas here and there that either take up something interesting that a side character is doing, or fill in a lacunae in the plot. Because with a long-running series like this, you can't tell things day by day, so you'll have jumps of months sometimes. And sometimes you want to return to one of those periods when things were somewhat quiet on the main plot line, but things were nonetheless happening. So, should I want to go back at any point, I could easily drop back into the story and do, short novels or novellas to add to the universe, as you might say. Or I can continue with something else, because I do have a few other things in mind.
That's great. Diana, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. We'll all be watching in April when the new season begins. And do you have an expected date for the 9th book that you're working on?
No, it would be nice if it came out sometime around putative season 3, but no telling.
Great. Where can people find you to get plugged in and find all of your work and follow you online?
Well, I have a website, which is www.dianagabaldon.com. Easy enough. I also have a Facebook page that is, facebook.com/author Diana Gabaldon. There is another Plain Diana Gabaldon page, which actually isn't mine, even though it has my picture on it. So you want the one that is author Diana Gabaldon. And I also have a Twitter identity. It's writer with a capital W _ cap D cap G, writer DG.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Once and ago, Hulda said, land full of witches. Witches in the sky, in the trees, witches down the well. Justine, a great witch. Many herbs, many friends. One day, curse fall. Everyone die, everyone who believe in hexe. This 1692. Hidden the knowledge is. The appointed hide it. A great curse cast in Salem that year. Legion, she cast curse to kill the day world. In New Amsterdam they not know, only see. Everyone die. What for? They blame Justine. Chased her off. She come here, I think. Hide from witch hunters. You, her blood.
Possibly Hulda was correct. I was a witch, just as she was. She promised my magic would come once I was a woman. I cannot say by what steps I came to believe Hulda's seductive promises of power, but I do know the moment when I chose to be a witch, irrevocably and with my whole heart. On the Sunday that Cornelia Van Cortlandt became Cornelia Beekman, the newly wedded pair made their first public appearance at church, their coming out, as was the custom, so that our poor congregation could thoroughly enjoy the spectacle of her bridal finery. The pair arrived late, with the whole bridal party in wedding array. Cornelia wore fawn-colored silk over a light blue damask petticoat. Gerard wore a waistcoat of the same, and a long coat of white broadcloth. After services, the Beekmans graciously shared the leftovers of their wedding feast, serving chicken and ale to the congregation, outside among the graves of the old burying ground. The day was pleasant and the grass sweet. The tenant farmers and peasant wives stood all hunched about, licking their fingers and making little bows of deference. Cornelia held a bouquet of orange blossoms to her cheek, and everyone agreed that she was the most beautiful young lady in all creation, married to the most good-natured and remarkable man. "That will be you some day," my mother whispered. The sun kissed Gerard's forehead as he reached into his purse and showered the graveyard with coins. All my neighbors fell to their knees at the couple's feet, scrabbling for pennies. Only I remained unbent. I stood, staring daggers into Cornelia, as she accepted a surreptitious kiss from her beautiful husband. Oh, that kiss in the graveyard. A perfect kiss of love and devotion and tribute. She noticed my expression of pain and mistook it for disappointment. "Did you not get a penny, dear?" she said, smiling. "Here you go." She threw her bouquet of orange blossoms to me. I caught it and gave her a tiny bow. Yes, I thought, that would be me some day. I crushed the bouquet to my heart and swore my oath. Cornelia would not win. She was no better than I. I was special, too. I wore no emeralds. I wore no silk, but I trailed fireflies. I deserved such a perfect kiss. I deserved such a perfect man. And if I could not win a god by grace, I would seize one by sorcery.